Hello, today I'm going to show y'all how to find the steepness of a transition on a skateboard and how to find the derivative of that formula. So for the formula, I used f of x is equal to 6x to the power of 5 minus 8x to the power of 3 plus 12. First, you have to use the power rule on the 6x5, so you would end up doing the power rule just n of x to the power of n minus 1, so you would go 6 times 5x, and then you would to the power of 5 minus 1, which would give you 30x to the power of 4, and then you would do the same thing for the negative 8x to the power of 3, where you would go negative 8 times 3x, and then you would do to the power of 3 minus 1, and that would give you negative 24x squared. And then there's that constant of plus 12, and so to find the derivative of a constant, you just turn it to 0. So that's how you solve problem 1. So how to solve problem 2, it's got to be, I'm going to find the variable speed over a curved surface when you're riding a skateboard over a curved surface. So just going on a different route, like curved, but the ground's flat and you're just changing speed and rolling on a surface. We're going to use the formula g of x is equal to, in parentheses, 2x to the power of 2 plus 4. And then we're going to times that by, in the parentheses, x to the power of 3 minus 1. So first you want to use the product rule and the power rule. And the product rule is where you use the inverse of u times v plus u times the inverse of v, or the derivative. And so you would just use, and you also got to use the power rule on this problem. So you do n of x, n minus 1. And so for the u, we know that the inverse of u, which we know the inside is 2x to the power of 2 plus 4, and you would just turn that into 4x using the power rule, because you would just put that 2 times the 2, and then that power of 2 just turns into 1, so you really just get 4x because the constant goes away. So that's the u, the inverse of u is just 4x. V, we just know that's x to the third minus 1, and we know u is just 2x squared plus 4, because that's the and then so for v, for the inverse of v, it goes from x to the power of 3 minus 1, and you just use the power rule, which turns it into 3x squared, because that constant goes away. You times the 3 times the x, and then that the power of 3 turns into power 2, and that's using the power rule. And then you got to multiply using that whole product rule, and the product rule is the inverse of u times v plus u times the inverse of v. So you would go from 4x times x to the third minus 1 plus 2x squared plus 4, and that's in parentheses, and then you times that by 3x squared, and this is where you would get the 4x to the power of 4 minus 4x plus 6x to the power of 4 plus 12x squared, and both of those two things are in parentheses. And then once you solve that whole thing using algebra, you would get the derivative of g of x is equal to 10x to the power of 4 plus 12x squared minus 4x, and that's how you find the final one. Okay, so for the equation 3, we're going to use it to track a graph for if you're in a skateboard and you're in a bowl and you're going back and forth in the bowl. So for that formula, I use h of x is equal to, in parentheses, 3x to the power of 4 minus 5x, parentheses, to the power of 6. So in order to find the derivative of this, you're going to need to use the chain rule and the power rule. Now when you got to first use the power rule to find what's going to be in the chain rule, but the chain rule is basically the inverse of f in parentheses g of x times the inverse of g of x. So it's pretty easy to find the inverse of that whole in parentheses function, because you can basically just use the power rule, and that 6 on the outside turns into a 5 because of the n minus 1, and then you just pull that 6 in front of it. So you would end up with just 6 in parentheses 3x to the power of 4 minus 5x to the power of 5. But you're not done there, because you also have to find the inverse of g of x. And for that, you're basically just going to use the power rule on the 3x to the power of 4 and the 5x. And when you do that, basically it just turns into 12x minus 5. And then you're going to do the inverse of h of x is equal to 6 in parentheses 3x to the power of 4 minus 5x to the power of 5 times 12x minus 5 in parentheses, and that's it. That's how you solve it. So, yep.